Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Melanie and Mark for inviting me and setting this up, and say that I appreciate all the efforts of Firewise and Fire Safe and CERT volunteers in the area for what they do. I live in Moraga, so not too far away from where most of you are situated. And I work for United Policyholders, which is a nonprofit that is dedicated to helping consumers with insurance issues. Much of the time that is helping people work their way through total loss claims from wildfires where their homes have burned down. We do this on a nationwide basis. We have staff right now in Colorado dealing with wildfire claimants there and helping them. And we've done a lot of events here in this area recently, particularly down in Santa Cruz area. As Mark mentioned, I was with the Department of Insurance for 35 years. And actually why I, in retirement, am working with United Policyholders now is we did so many events together to help policyholders with their claims that I really admired this organization for what they do. So please take a look at our website, all kinds of information about coverage and claims issues and anything you need to know about insurance. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our, about one of our initiatives, which is wildfire risk reduction and asset protection. We refer to it as our WRAP program. And I'm going to kind of walk you through most of this discussion today is really about underwriting and rates in insurance for homes that have a wildfire risk. And as we know today, that's pretty much any home in California that's not dead center in the near the bay or something. Any of these foothills that we live in East Bay, or of course the Sierras and everywhere across the state has some risk. So first, to talk a little bit about underwriting and rates. Mark, if you could go to the next slide, please.
See if that goes there. Gotta get back. Is that it?
That's it. Okay, what I'm trying to capture here is a slide showing in terms of how an insurer underwrites wildfire risk. The main tool they use is a wildfire risk model. That model pinpoints the address that's being underwritten. Here we have a location in Orinda, California. And basically in that little red circle, there is a targeted home address. This one happens to be near Linda Vista in Orinda. And what the insurer is doing is running a kind of a formula that looks at the slope that the home is seated on, the fuel, meaning the timber or brush within a given vicinity of the home, and the ease or difficulty of access of getting to that home in terms of like one-way streets and narrow streets, or whether it is easily accessible from multiple directions. Then a score is assigned. And you can see that this is kind of a low resolution satellite image. You can't see really anything detail about the home at all. It's just really this kind of calculus from a kind of a distant look at the home. So next slide, please. So those scores that come from wildfire models are what determines whether you're eligible for coverage. And they also play a major role in what the rate charged will be. And this is actually an exhibit from a rate filing. So in California, insurers have to get their rates approved by the California Department of Insurance. So they submit applications for rate change. They have to justify why they need an increase or a decrease. And in this case, I think this is an all-state rate filing. They use a core logic. It's called a wildfire model. And what this chart is showing is how much rate increase they want by wildfire score grouping. So that first box with 3 bars on the left, you see under it, it says 0 to 59. What that is saying is they want a very tiny rate increase. So the blue bar is what they're charging today, and the green bar is how much more increase they'd like to achieve with this filing. You can see that there's hardly any difference between the blue bar and that green bar. If you look all the way over to the other side at the 90 to 100, that's the scoring block for the most extreme wildfire scores from the model that Allstate uses here. And you can see they already charge more based on the height of that blue bar there, but they're looking to more than double the rate in this one filing for people at that extreme level of risk. So almost no change to their basic book of business that's urban, huge change in where the score for those with high wildfire risk. And the yellow bar is what they actually say they need. And they will likely make another filing and come back for more rate to get something closer to what that yellow bar shows. So that's kind of what you make from this. So right now, what they're projecting for that high score is that premiums will flow on average from 1,500 to 3,600 in this one filing. So, and even though the insurer writes some business at that high score, probably not a lot, they probably non-renewed most of it, and they wouldn't write any new business. I would expect that they wouldn't write any new business other than those kind of first couple bars over to the left. Low scores, low wildfire risk. They just happen to have some remaining higher risk business on the books. Okay, so that's working off one of those very kind of non-specific, just targeting wildfire models that have been the major kind of underwriting and rating tool insurers have used for wildfire for the last 10 years now. But things are starting to change. And here you get a look at a study that basically shows the picture of the home that is being obtained is a much more granular view where you can actually see that the rooftop of the home, you can see the vegetation around the home, or where the home has cleared the vegetation, you can see that it's got a buffer of cleared space around the home. This is kind of where we're heading. Much higher resolution imagery, granular detail about the property. And actually in these newer models, you see not only the landscape, but they can tell the roofing type. They can tell if you have a pool or a trampoline, any of those things that they also use in their underwriting. So this whole process is evolving to a more specific review of the home. So next slide, please, Mark. At the same time, the Department of Insurance has proposed some regulations that would require insurers to recognize the homes that have done mitigation actions and give them a discount, both on property level mitigation and community level mitigation. So, that can be any number of things that you've done to your specific home. And it could be any number of things that are going on in your community in terms of a general widespread effort to reduce the risk around your community, however that's defined. So these are only draft regulations. They haven't, they've been put out there. The department had a hearing to discuss them. The insurance industry does not like these. They don't like to have the department impose anything into the rating plan. So I'm sure there's a possibility of a dispute over whether these will ever make it into law. But those industry objections might be a little less strong now that they actually have the tools to easily comply with this obligation, at least on the individual property level, that in kind of consistent with the more detailed tools we were just looking at in the last slide. So next slide, please, Mark. The reason that the department is proposing this mitigation is because there's a sense that using those more crude or look at the satellite imagery without taking into account any of the specific characteristics of the home is in a sense unfair to the homeowner. And it's been shown through research from a number of experts that there are things, effective actions you can do at your home to make a difference in the vulnerability to fire. Here you see just a simple comparison of some basic issues that come up, roof cover type, the fencing, combustible zone. Those are kind of the key components of pretty much any expert evaluation of mitigation actions that need to take place at the home and that have shown in multiple wildfires to have had value in reducing risk or damage, and sometimes no damage at all. So this is kind of why the department's getting there, because this is an achievable thing for insurers to do. So next slide. So as we're saying, the actions that are required of homeowners aren't overwhelming. You're not going to have to flood the plain around your home and live out there in kind of a houseboat to feel safe or mitigated. And next slide, please, Mark. You don't have to build a castle and pull up a drawbridge if there's a wildfire. The actions that are recommended are basic actions that can be taken at any home, any kind of standard home. And what we have here is the list of actions that United Policyholders has recommended. But these aren't of United Policyholders creation. We have been holding monthly wrap meetings with testimony from experts across the state and outside the state, research organizations ranging from the industry's own Institute for Business and Home Safety, IBHS, to the fire experts from Cal Poly, where they have a fire program, UC Cooperative, Cal Fire has testified as to effective actions, local firefighters, and an array of experts, people from Firewise and fire safe communities. And these are the basic actions that we've come up with. Again, no ownership here from United Policyholders. What we want to do is just identify what are the effective actions, and then we want to communicate with insurers to see if they're willing to amend their rating and underwriting to recognize that any homeowner that takes these actions deserves a better shot at eligibility, and also should potentially warrant a discount. the issues here, Class A type roof, not a wood shake roof, basically. Blocking all any gaps in the roof. Ember resistant vents, which is basically about the screening in the vents being very small ember resistant layer. Next slide, please, Mark. Fences, last 5 feet of the fence. If it's a wooden fence, don't connect directly to the house. We don't want your wooden fence to be the wick that brings the fire right to the siding of your home. Cleaning up around your underneath and above decks so that they're not layered with combustible materials themselves. Same with not having other combustible structures attached to the home. And to the degree there are other buildings near the home, could be a barn, could be a shed, anything like that. That side of the home should have non-combustible cladding. This is probably more critical in some of the more outlying areas than of a more urban community. Same with the next recommendation, that if you have a nearby structure, that you have dual paned windows with at least one tempered glass pane in the next one, Mark, please. And then the rest is about defensible space around the home. It's your landscape, things that I'm guessing that the listeners here are already very accustomed with, or familiar with, having that 5-foot zone 0 where there's nothing combustible right up against the house, and then reaching out from there with a well-landscaped and kind of well-maintained landscape that's watered and doesn't bring a kind of a ladder of fire conductivity right to the home, right? Next slide, please. So that list, again, is very similar to the list of recommendations from many other groups. In fact, just at our last meeting, the IBHS that I mentioned, which is an industry-sponsored research organization that looks at home survival from wind and fire and any number of insured perils, came up with their own list. They're calling it a wildfire prepared home. You can look up that, wildfirepreparedhome.org, to look at their recommendations, but they're a very simple set of basic recommendations, very similar to United policyholders. Next slide, Mark. Again, the WUI codes, which are the 7A codes, which are really about new construction, though, have very similar requirements: Class A roofs, ember resistant vents. So same, very similar set of requirements. Next slide. So what we're really hoping, and of course, I think probably, I guess, preaching to the choir here, but is that we can convince more homeowners that this is a very achievable goal to, kind of meet that mitigation standard that could help you access insurance for a lot of homeowners who have been non-renewed by their previous carrier that they might have had for decades, and potentially even get a discount. And so we're hoping, well, there's some easy steps to take, starting with just, your landscape and dealing with the worst of it first. Next slide, please. And, ultimately, what we're trying to do is leverage the fact that everybody has to have insurance on their home to make insurance kind of the linchpin in getting people to do work that, you would hope maybe they do to stop their home from burning, but if that is something you can put aside, the fact that you get an annual insurance bill, or maybe you've even gotten a non-renewal notice, we hope that insurance makes it a little more compelling to do the work to mitigate your home and reduce your risk of loss. Next slide, please. So I do always want to add, because, odds of ever having a loss are very limited. And I'm hoping it's nothing that any of you ever experience. But just in case, for that very remote possibility, and to avoid the worst of what people deal with after a loss, we'll always say, if you don't want to have to go through and do a complete home inventory of everything you own and when you bought it, at least walk through your home with your phone and record everything that you have in your house. Record your contents of each room, your furnishings, and even pulling open the drawers in your kitchen and bedroom drawers and closets, and making sure you capture as much of your contents either in photos or film, so at least it will provide some evidence of what you owned if you do have a total loss. And the other thing that we find about 2/3 of the people with total losses experience is that they are underinsured and unable to rebuild their home with the amount of insurance they're going to receive. In California, basically the burden of getting that coverage limit right or adequate to rebuild your home is on the policyholder, except in some very limited circumstances. Find a lot of people actually have limits sometimes under 200, what comes out to $250 square foot to rebuild their home. That really doesn't do it anymore anywhere in the Bay Area, at least, or even nearby counties. And so we always ask, take a look. You probably should be at least insured to $350 per square foot, and probably much more in the communities that most of you live in. You really don't want to get caught off guard being underinsured. And actually, even to bump your coverage by $50,000 on your dwelling, that would give you more than $100,000 in additional insurance coverage when you total in all the additional coverages for contents and additional living expense that flow from your coverage limit. So please take a look and make sure you're not majorly underinsured. And I'll also add, you might want to make sure you have a very high deductible. It's typically not in your best interest to file any insurance claims that you can reasonably afford to pay for yourself. Claims history is a rating factor that goes into the calculation of your homeowner's premium. And so whenever you have a claim, you end up paying a higher rate for several years thereafter, just because of your loss history. So, and some losses actually result in non-renewals. So just things for you to know. This is about mitigation. This is the initiative we're now taking to the insurers and seeing if we can make an impact on their upcoming rate filings. And I did get a couple questions. I don't know if you want me to jump into those, or if anyone has some questions online, I'm glad to answer anything I can about your homeowner's insurance.
Yeah, let's go. Thank you very much, Joel. Very good summary of where you're at, and we appreciate your time. I would like to go ahead and let anyone ask questions here, and then I can follow up and check. I know Robert is here. He asked some questions. I don't think Michael Brown is not online that I can tell. But go ahead.
Okay.
Sue?
Yes, thank you. I have a question, Joel, and that is, you live in our area in Moraga. What is the average, or what do you advise homeowners in the Orinda area to plan on rebuilding when it comes to cost per square foot? Is 350 too low for this area?
Yeah, I got to say, Sue, I'm not an expert in that. I do know one of our local agents says that $400 a square foot would be the bare minimum that he would recommend. And he says even that is probably low. Everything is, most of our homes are very similar in terms of the, the basic structure, but it's all the finishes that make all the difference. So it's all about, how much cabinetry you have and what the countertops are and the types of windows you have in your home, and then whether you have, wood flooring, and then if your home is like a multiple level type home that requires more engineering, all of those things are what really drives up the reconstruction cost from the basic box that a home otherwise is, with sheetrock and 2x4 framing, into something much more elaborate. So it's really hard to say. So it's usually a good idea to contact your agent and see what they come up with as a recommendation. And, if they potentially commit to something, that you would want to document that as well, as if they indicate something that they think is the right amount of coverage. It's pretty hard to get an agent or insurer to commit to what is the amount you need, because they like to leave that on your shoulders.
So Sue, I can share, I did get my agent. I have State Farm like many people, and I'm currently using $650 a square foot.
Yeah.
And I want to share that I also mentioned that I'm a small apartment building owner, and I've done 2 remodels in the last 15 months, and just the normal stuff, doors are going up 40 to 50% in materials. And as you know, labor is tight. So this is, if you got a loss in the next year or two, it's going to be significantly higher in the 30% range minimum in my mind of what you might have had 2 years ago, with the cost of materials and the cost of labor going up.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have some questions for Joel? Okay. I was just looking at some of the things. I guess what Michael Brown, just representing Michael Brown, was that he's saying a lot. Some of those things that you're bringing up, Joel, may be difficult for different people to do. So I think in general we support it. Really, what I see is most everything we're doing there is what we're already doing at Firewise. None of this is unusual for people who have been actively engaged in Firewise the last couple of years. Still doesn't mean some of that's not difficult. Back from your house, people have wood-sided buildings, that's about out where we live. So there are some challenges to that. But does anybody challenge what UP is trying to do? Any comments on that?
I have another comment. I just finished reading Betty Ann Bruno's book, The Munchkin Diary, and Betty Ann Bruno lost her house in the Oakland Hills fire, and she has 2 chapters that she devoted just to first the experience of the fire and evacuation, and the second one was dealing with the insurance companies. It took her 4.5 years to get a settlement from State Farm. Even though she and her husband were ready to rebuild, they had a contractor and an architect lined up 2 months after the fire. But thanks to United Policyholders for, I guess that's when they were formed, Amy Bach.
Right.
Yeah, and thanks to them, they were able to advise homeowners to form groups that had the same insurance, and that group then lobbied the particular insurance company, and that did help to speed things along and get a more equitable settlement. But nonetheless, it took her 4.5 years.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. Like I say, documenting your contents is a big help. There have been a lot of new laws put in place today that get you quicker payouts on additional living expense and your contents and such, that people, it can be very grueling otherwise to go through the whole inventory process you have to do with insurer, and this is, the sales pitch for at least filming, well, I'll say recording on your phone what you have, is that the contents process is about, you have to write down every single thing you owned, when you bought it, and what you paid and what condition you think it was in. And then, you get the actual cash value payment for each of those things. And then you have to go buy it, replace it to get that actual replacement cost difference. And this is at the same time while you're, trying to get a contractor and rebuild. It's, I have interacted with so many people, with United policyholders and the department who have total losses. And it is a grueling experience to rebuild. Of course, as Mark mentioned, not only is there inflation and labor shortage, generally in the area, but it's hard to find a contractor who is available. I mean, to all of a sudden build several hundred homes need to be built. So it's a lot. So you really want to make sure your coverage isn't getting in the way, that you've at least documented what you have and have something realistic for your limit, because you're starting from way behind if you don't at least get there. One thing, I guess, and that's getting more difficult for people to keep.
Joel, you kind
I
of
would hope that your Firewise support the Department of Insurance in this effort to push forward these mitigation regulations. There's public input. Anytime there are regulations proposed, I think the department will come out with a new release of these. And I would hope Orinda or your parent organizations can weigh in and to say these would be helpful. I think Michael Brown, who sent some questions, thought that maybe this could be more problematic than it's worth to give mitigation discounts. But it actually, it does no harm to the insurer in terms of how much premium they would receive in a rate filing. It just is who pays a little more and who pays a little less. People who have, would get a mitigation discount would pay a little less, and everybody else would pay a tiny bit more if these discounts went into place. So it's really no skin off the insurer's back in the end. It's just a practical way actually to incentivize people to do the work themselves, because the insurance reward is a financial benefit. If just avoiding a fire isn't enough of an incentive to do the work.
Thanks, Joel. Hey, I put the chat up? Can you see the chat? Jorge has asked a question, particularly about ideas about expanding the FAIR plan. Can you look at that, Joel? Do you have any comments to Jorge's question?
Yeah, the FAIR plan is becoming a little broader coverage than it had been. I think ultimately they're going to move away from just having this kind of a really restrictive fire policy to something a little closer to a homeowner's policy. I don't think there is some legislation. I think maybe a bill by Assembly Person Levine out of I think Marin County about creating a pool, but the FAIR plan is backed by the insurance industry, so there's no real state funds at stake in backing the FAIR plan, and because the whole industry that writes homeowners business backs it, it makes the FAIR plan a very financially secure organization and way to do business. The real point, of course, is to avoid being in the FAIR plan. And that's why it comes down to doing as much mitigation and anything you can to become a good, insurance consumer. But while there are other proposals and, Florida's done other things, I don't personally see the FAIR plan going away here anytime soon as our most responsive way to deal with people who can't get coverage. And it would be letting the insurance industry kind of off the hook if we didn't leave it as we do now. I looked at these other questions.
Joel,
Yeah.
this is Rob Formanek. In a way, I'm going to state the obvious, and you've kind of spoken to it already in a way. But what we find, what at least I'm seeing, is that there's a sort of gradation in the degree of involvement of homeowners across the community. And it looks to me like about 2/3 or so get more seriously involved and maybe a third less seriously involved. Just getting insurance, you point out, is a pretty big incentive, and it may come to that, and that should be quite forceful as an incentive. But these discounts, not so much because we're trying to keep the rates down as much as that we're trying to incentivize our neighbors. Because I think if your home is well hardened and your neighbor's is relatively close and is not, you're probably going to go with them when the fire, if it should ever, God forbid, come through. So then there's this issue, though, that you talked about of how does an insurance company find a fair way and a meaningful way to put discounts in that will incentivize better behavior. I think it's not only those 2/3 of us that are more involved. I also think there are certain things that are very hard to change in one's way of thinking about how they're going to landscape their house. So 5 feet, no vegetation within the house, that's a kind of, that's not something that everybody's just going to say, oh, fine. But with some financial incentives that might help even those of us who've been more motivated to still take some of those final measures. So again, I understand there's the issue of what exactly, how do you rate a particular hardening in terms of how much the discount should be? What about neighbors' homes that are nearby? Does that then get factored into your discount or not? Who can afford to do, how can the insurance companies afford to do this rating if they're going to do it in a meaningful way? You've talked to all of that, but again, I just think that's kind of the core issue of all of this.
Yeah, so I'll say this. I think the way, once they introduce mitigation discounts, if you have met the standard, you will get the discount regardless of what your neighbor's property looks like. So this is going to be property by property. However, if your neighbor's more likely to, if it was too big of a hazard, is that they wouldn't offer you the coverage at all, right? So this is how some people get non-renewed, even though they've done everything, kind of as mentioned here in the chat. I've done everything at my house, and yet I got non-renewed. That is either the fact that the neighborhood had a higher risk, some of the homes, or the insurer just wanted to thin out their concentration level even in a given area. We have seen a lot of insurers that did realize, they'd written every home, in a 2-block radius, and they just don't like to have that much in values, all subject to the same potential loss. So insurers, even if, the home itself looked fine, that they might have just reduced the numbers of policies that they've written in a given zip code. And then they put a kind of a freeze on that zip code to not write any additional homes. So it's kind of hard to know in examples where you've done everything you can and why you get non-renewed, but concentration of risk is one, and general neighborhood considerations can be another. One of the things I know Michael mentioned is that inspections are a problem, so insurers don't like to do inspections because they cost money. And if they come out and they cite something that, means you don't warrant the discount, and then you call back and say, well, now I've done that, they'd have to go back and inspect again, so that they don't really like to get caught up in that kind of process. But I do think, for one, this wildfire prepared home that IBHS is offering and may end up being a discount that insurers will offer. The homeowner has to pay for an inspection and ultimately get a certification because the industry funds IBHS. Presumably IBHS certification will have a credibility that insurers don't even necessarily assign to your local fire department or other experts who might come out and write a letter that you get a clean bill of health. So I kind of think, IBHS program might work in that way in a place that other efforts that are similar don't work because of the insurance component. But also, as I mentioned, because the imagery is getting more granular and they're able to see your roof, I think they're going to be able to tell the 5-foot perimeter around your home as we get a little more advanced here with imagery. So, a lot of these things are kind of one and done. Once you get the vents in place that are ember resistant, or a Class A roof, or, if you change your windows out or anything else hardscape wise. So then it's just down to a consistent maintenance of the landscape itself. And maybe there's a way to submit annual photos. It's just something that insurers have chosen not to deal with. But I think we're at a place where it's achievable for the insurers to monitor, and obviously, homeowners, it makes a difference to do the mitigation. So there's a feeling that should be recognized in the underwriting and rating process, just in fairness.
Okay. Hey, Joel, thanks a lot.